Rise of the European Emperor by Taishan Laonyo.
Chapter 341, Sweet Dates After the Big Stick. I don't accept it. We Portugal are the overlord of the sea. Manuel I said with all his might. However, Ferdinand II had the bad idea given by Marin a few years ago. So, he said leisurely, I admit that Portugal is the overlord of the sea. But so what? We Spain are the overlord of the Iberian Peninsula. If you want to survive on the Iberian Peninsula, you have to be honest. You can sink all the Spanish ships. But I don't care. I can send a large army to capture Lisbon and catch you all and make a fuss. Even France, the most powerful country on land in Europe, was driven out of Italy by us. Now, Spain is the overlord on land in Europe. Little Portugal, if you don't accept it, just give it a try. After speaking, Ferdinand II looked up at the ceiling, looking like a lonely master. Manuel I didn't think of it before, but now that he thinks about it, it's true. The Spanish army is indeed too strong. At least, it's several blocks ahead of Portugal. Now, they have defeated the French army again, and they call themselves the overlord of Europe. It's not bragging. At least, there is no pressure to beat Portugal. No matter how reluctant they are, the Portuguese have to admit that even if they destroy all the Spanish ships, it will not shake the foundation of Spain. However, as long as the Spaniards occupy Lisbon, they will destroy the foundation of Portugal. Therefore, Portugal has no way to deal with the rogue threat of Spain and can only accept its fate. Manuel I understood that it was impossible for Portugal to monopolize the interests of India. However, thinking of the division of Africa in the plan, he got angry again. Okay, let's not talk about the interests of India. But what about your interests in Africa? Don't you have the savage continent? Manuel I, who had long regarded Africa as Portugal's private land, how could he tolerate Spain snatching food? It's like this, Spain feels that it can't manage so much land. So, it decided to give up the colonization rights of the savage continent. Moreover, the Holy See also feels that Spain does not deserve to have such a large colony. Ferdinand II shrugged and began to shirk responsibility. Not worthy? Manuel I was a little confused. Yes, it is not worthy. Spain has only achieved the achievement of conquering the Kingdom of Granada. Therefore, it is too exaggerated to own such a large place as the savage continent. Therefore, the Holy See intends to take back the ownership of the savage continent and redistribute the colonies. So Spain is allocated to Africa. Is it so to rob Portugal of its interests? Manuel I said angrily. Aha, Spain does not deserve to own the savage continent. But at least Spain expelled the pagans from the Iberian Peninsula. What about Portugal? It is just a group of greedy businessmen, so it is even less worthy of owning so many colonies. Besides, is Portugal capable of occupying such a large colony? This has nothing to do with you. Also, you gave up the savage continent, probably because of the terrible diseases and monsters there. Don't think I don't know. Manuel I said unhappily. Ferdinand II smiled awkwardly. Indeed, he made up his mind to give up the savage continent after reading Columbus's Diary of Savage Terror and Marin's Persuasion. Then the savage continent is ownerless? Manuel I asked curiously. It's not ownerless, but waiting for those who have made great contributions to the Holy See to claim it. For example, if Portugal can convert all the blacks in the areas currently controlled into Christians, the Holy See will reward you with a large piece of land on the savage continent. The same is true for Spain. As long as you hand over the Kingdom of Naples to the Holy See. Ferdinand II immediately changed the subject. He was not willing to give away the Kingdom of Naples, which he regarded as a treasure. In addition, if any of you can capture Jerusalem and defend it, the entire savage continent will be yours. Julius II tempted. Ferdinand II and Manuel I rolled their eyes at the same time. This is too difficult. To be honest, it is not difficult to capture Jerusalem. If you gather tens of thousands of troops, you can always take it down. However, it is difficult to defend it. After all, there are many white-robed brothers in West Asia and North Africa. With so many Arab scimitar cavalry coming, who can guarantee that they can defend it? After the big stick was hit, Julius II decided to give Portugal a sweet date so that Portugal would not rebound violently and cause the church to lose its dignity. So he waved his hand to Marin, who was waiting on the side. Marin, come here and tell His Majesty Manuel about the Golden Kingdom in Africa. Golden Kingdom? Manuel I was immediately interested. The Portuguese explored the coast of Africa, wasn't it just to find this thing? Yes, Your Majesty. Marin said as he spread out a map of Africa in front of Manuel I, and then said, Your Majesty, have you heard of the deeds of Mansa Musa, the Golden Sultan? Manuel I had certainly heard of it. After all, on the coast of Guinea in West Africa, Portuguese merchants had come into contact with the now declining Mali Empire, and naturally heard of the most luxurious monarch in the history of the Mali Empire. Of course, Manuel I had only heard of some distorted legends, and he couldn't be sure. However, Marin told him that his teacher Einstein had seen detailed records about the Golden Sultan Mansa Musa when he traveled in Egypt. Then, Marin told Manuel I the news he had told Ferdinand II. What? Mansa Musa really took 33,000 pounds of gold to make a pilgrimage? Manuel I was also shocked. In the past, although he knew a little about the legend of the Golden Sultan, he was also skeptical. However, Marin told him confidently that it was true. How could he not be surprised? It is absolutely true. According to records, when Mansa Musa passed through Cairo, he squandered gold, causing the gold price in Cairo to plummet, and it did not recover within 20 years. For this, you can send someone to Egypt to check the relevant historical materials. The specific years are around 1324 to 1325. Seeing that Marin was so sure, Manuel I had to believe it. Moreover, the Portuguese also heard some related deeds in their contact with the weakened Mali Empire. It's just that there is no confirmation. After all, the Portuguese don't believe the words of African blacks. However, the records of the Egyptians should be credible. Your Majesty, please look, this is Timbuktu on the Niger River. Marin pointed to a certain location on the map. Wait. Is this Timbuktu the legendary gold trade center of the Mali Empire? Manuel I obviously knew a lot about the history of the Mali Empire, unlike Ferdinand II. Yes, it's that Timbuktu. The 33,000 pounds of gold that the Golden Sultan Mansa Musa brought to Mecca was actually collected from taxes collected in the trade market in Timbuktu. So much gold can be obtained by collecting taxes alone. If this city is occupied. Marin hadn't finished speaking, Manuel I and Ferdinand II's eyes lit up. However, thinking of the 66.1 billion pounds of copper in Zambia, Ferdinand II forcibly suppressed his desire for Timbuktu. Are you sure it's at this location? King Manuel I of Portugal swallowed his saliva and asked excitedly. In fact, the legend of Timbuktu has long been circulated in Europe. However, it is a city in the desert, far inland. Europeans have only heard of its legend, but do not know its exact location. As a result, Timbuktu has not been found for hundreds of years. The first time Europeans occupied Timbuktu was in 1894. At that time, the gold trade in Timbuktu had long declined. There are two main factors. One is that the gold on the Mandinka Plateau has been mined almost completely. The gold in the coastal Gold Coast, Ghana, and Guinea was directly plundered from the coastal areas by Western colonists. In this way, the amount of gold flowing into Timbuktu naturally decreased. Oh, by the way, Your Majesty Manuel, I heard from my teacher that in 1496, the emperor of the Askia dynasty of the Songhai Empire, Muhammad Dur, carried 300,000 gold coins and made the second golden pilgrimage. Although this time was not as large as that of Mansa Musa, the Askia dynasty was only established in 1493, so the gold reserves were naturally not much. But if Portugal gets Timbuktu, I believe. Manuel I nodded, letting him know what Marin was talking about. Moreover, he planned to send someone to Cairo to check whether there were these two golden pilgrimages. If the pilgrimage in 1496 was true, then Timbuktu was obviously a strategic location with a very high gold content, worthy of Portugal's occupation. However, he frowned and looked at Zimbabwe and other places allocated to Spain on the map, and asked, "What's over there?" The place allocated to Spain, Zimbabwe, also has gold. But, not as much as West Africa. In total, it is much less than West Africa. Therefore, the Pope intends to give Morocco to Spain to conquer. The ultimate goal is to turn Morocco into a Christian region. Marin explained. Then Portugal's trading point in Morocco. Once Spain controls Morocco, Portuguese merchants will probably not be able to operate anymore. Manuel I nodded, and naturally understood this truth. If the Spanish occupied Morocco, they would never give the trade benefits back to the Portuguese. Moreover, Portugal did not have the confidence to defeat so many Moroccan cavalry. It was okay to build a few bunkers along the coast. But it was not something that the Portuguese army could do to march inland. However, Manuel I was very unwilling to let Spain occupy the golden country called Zimbabwe. At this time, Julius II spoke, "If Portugal accepts this suggestion, then I will make the decision to award the colonization rights of China to Portugal exclusively." Julius II presented another big sweet date. Manuel I's breathing became rapid. China, that is a place that is said to be richer than India, it seems to be worth it. His original indifference had long been gone with this compensation. Even Manuel I was a little smug. Of course, he didn't know the trap in this sentence. China's colonization rights were simply a trap. Ferdinand II naturally knew the power of the Ming dynasty, Marin had told him before. Therefore, he had no objection. At this time, the Ming Empire was in its heyday and was in its heyday. How could the Portuguese, who were only good at land warfare, covet it? Giving the colonization rights of the Ming Empire to Portugal was no different from not saying anything. It's just that Portugal didn't know how powerful the Ming Empire was. From the first time they came to the east until the demise of the Ming dynasty, the Portuguese failed to complete the colonization of the Ming dynasty. The only Macau was a place to stay obtained through bribery, not a colony. Because Macau was managed by local Chinese officials until the end of the Qing dynasty, the Portuguese did not have any consular jurisdiction here. It was not until 1887 that Portugal took advantage of the situation and signed the Sino-Portuguese Treaty of Peace and Commerce with the declining Qing dynasty, and then obtained the management rights of Macau. Therefore, it is useless to give him the colonization rights of China, who was only good at land warfare. The Portuguese did not have such a big appetite to eat this sweet date. Of course, Manuel I didn't know, and he was enjoying himself. Then, Spain and Portugal finally signed a treaty in peace, agreeing to divide Africa and share the Indian spice trade. Even the cunning Julius II, in order to pit Venice, privately suggested that the two countries organize a joint fleet to intercept the Arab spice transport ships that supplied the Venetians. And this is exactly what the two countries want. After all, with one less competitor, they will get a larger share. So, although they were in harmony, the two countries agreed to form a joint fleet to attack the interests of the Venetians. But in the unclear part of the treaty, Julius II added this paragraph in view of the mediation credit of Count Marin of East Frisia in the negotiations between the two countries. The colonization rights of the Japanese archipelago, the Ryukyu Islands, including the Ryukyu Islands and Taiwan, were granted to Marin von Hoffman. For this reason, Marin also specifically assured the two kings that Japan was a country with poor resources and was far less prosperous than China. Then, Manuel I agreed. Because of this treaty, Spain and Portugal later became jealous of Marin's large-scale mining of gold and silver in Japan. But by then, Marin had already grown strong and was not someone they could easily offend. Chapter 342 John Cabot. When the meeting ended, everyone began to leave the venue. But Ferdinand II deliberately fell behind and asked Marin in a low voice, "Why do you want Japan? Didn't you say that Japan is a poor island country? Why do you want it? Are you deceiving me?" Manuel I, who was walking in front, had sharper ears and stopped to listen carefully to Marin's explanation. "It's like this, Your Majesty, I am also jealous of China's silk and porcelain. Although China belongs to Portugal, I can build a base on the coastal islands and do some smuggling. Don't you think that the Japanese archipelago is the best smuggling base near China?" "Really?" Ferdinand II agreed with Marin's statement. Because it sounds reasonable, anyway, Ferdinand II couldn't think of a reason to refute it. "It's really despicable, Count Marin, how can you do this? It's still a Portuguese colony." Manuel I was a little angry. However, this guy is too arrogant. He directly starts to treat China as his colony. How shameless. "Your Majesty Manuel, Portugal eats meat, so why can't others drink soup? China is so big and profitable. How much can I make from smuggling? I guess it's not even a fraction of yours. Besides, if the smuggling ship is found by you, it's my bad luck." Marin simply followed the words of the arrogant Manuel I. The meaning of the words seemed that Portugal had already taken over the Ming dynasty. Manuel I thought about it, it was true, compared with smuggling and colonization, how much money can be made. When his Portugal controls China, it will be more strictly managed to prevent Marin's smuggling. By then, Marin won't even be given a sip of soup. But Manuel I never thought about whether he could defeat the Ming Empire. After Manuel I left, Ferdinand II said with a smile, "This fool really thinks that Portugal can conquer China. Portugal's weak army is simply asking for trouble when it faces the hundreds of thousands of troops of the Ming Empire. That's why I asked His Holiness the Pope to give me the Japanese archipelago. In this way, I can engage in smuggling. No matter whether Portugal can defeat the Ming Empire, smuggling will not be a problem anyway. It sounds great, it makes me want to go to Ming Dynasty for smuggling. No need, Your Majesty, if I succeed in smuggling. By then, I will definitely let your son, Prince Juan, be the agent of Chinese specialties in Spain and Italy, and let him make a fortune together. You know, Prince Juan and I are friends." Marin was afraid that Spain would really intervene in the smuggling in the Ming dynasty, so he said so. That's great, Marin, don't forget what you said today. For Ferdinand II, who attached great importance to Prince Juan, if Prince Juan is good, then he is good. Definitely. Just like that, Ferdinand II left with great satisfaction. With a relaxed mood, Marin whistled and returned to his house. However, he had just rested for a while when an intelligence officer knocked on his door urgently. What's going on? I'm resting. Don't disturb me if it's nothing important. Marin said unhappily. My lord, it's a big deal. Marin knew the person who came. He was a close follower of Kohler named Jerry. Originally, this guy should have been in East Frisia, but he suddenly appeared here, obviously something big happened. So Marin was also nervous, thinking that something happened in East Frisia. What's wrong? What happened? Cape Breton Island has been discovered. Jerry said nervously. What? Marin was shocked. He always thought that North America was run by him alone. Since someone else has discovered it, then the secret may be leaked. Who was the discoverer? Marin asked nervously. It was an Italian captain named John Cabot, who served King Henry VII of England. Jerry said. In fact, in the original history, John Cabot discovered the east coast of North America as early as 1497. And Henry VII also declared North America to belong to Britain based on his discovery. Moreover, in the original history, John Cabot died in 1499. However, after Marin traveled through time in 1494, he changed history, which led to changes in Britain. John Cabot's voyage in 1497 did not take place, mainly because of Marin. Because he revealed that syphilis came from the savage continent, and the savage continent was not Asia, and there was no India. Therefore, the voyage in 1497 was cancelled by Henry VII. But because of this, John Cabot did not die in 1499, but was still alive and well. After thinking about it, Henry VII later felt that although there was no India, it was acceptable to occupy some territory in the savage continent as a colony. As for the real India, the British were a little worried about Portugal, which had stronger maritime power, and did not dare to get involved. In 1504, Henry VII finally agreed to John Cabot's exploration request. However, as in the original history, John Cabot was only given a small sailing ship of about 100 tons and 18 sailors. In this way, John Cabot took his 3 sons and 18 sailors, set off from the port of Bristol on that small sailing ship, sailed westward, and searched for the northern half of the savage continent. Then, John Cabot's boat, just like in the original history, arrived at Newfoundland. In the southeast of Newfoundland, John Cabot discovered the fishing boats sent out by Cape Breton Island. So John Cabot and his ship followed those fishing boats and arrived at Sydney, the capital of Cape Breton Island. Garland, the governor of Cape Breton Island, was shocked to learn that a British ship had arrived at Cape Breton Island. As one of the old men who had followed Marin the longest, Garland knew Marin's confidentiality requirements. Therefore, Garland did not intend to let John Cabot and his party go. However, he was also an old man who had been with Marin for many years and was still very scheming. He pretended to be very enthusiastic and warmly received John Cabot and his sailors. However, John Cabot was very cautious and only brought his 2 sons and 9 sailors ashore. The others continued to stay on the ship to prevent being detained. However, Garland concealed it very well and warmly entertained John Cabot and his party, with good wine and food every day. In addition, he also took John Cabot and his party to visit many places on the island, and it seemed that he had no idea of keeping it secret. Just like that, a few days later, John Cabot relaxed his vigilance. After John Cabot said that he was going to leave here and continue to explore, Garland enthusiastically expressed his intention to hold a farewell party. John Cabot, who had lost his vigilance, brought everyone ashore to attend the party, and then they were all arrested. Garland realized the seriousness of the matter and quickly sent a ship back to Europe to urgently report the matter to Marin and ask how to deal with the detained John Cabot and his party. However, when Garland's ship arrived at Emden, Marin had already gone south to Rome. Kohler felt that the matter was serious, so he sent his confidant Jerry to Rome to report the matter to Marin in person. Chapter 343 Pirate Plan. Marin was also shocked when he received Kohler's intelligence. He had long been on guard against Britain's competition with him for North America, so he had been plotting against Britain. But he didn't expect that the British would send ships to explore North America so early. Then, he found the information of John Cabot from the depths of his memory. Marin had always ignored this person. In fact, in history, this person was the first European to discover North America, not counting the legends of the Vikings in the Viking Age. However, John Cabot always thought that he had discovered the east coast of Japan or other Asian regions. John Cabot was originally Italian and settled in the port of Bristol, England, in 1490. In 1496, John Cabot heard that his Italian fellow countryman and colleague, John Cabot, was also a Genoese and also a navigator. Columbus had discovered the route to India to the west, actually America, so he was rewarded by the Spanish royal family and became a great noble. So, in 1496, John Cabot also had the idea of exploring new routes to the west for the King of England in order to gain noble status and huge benefits. Originally in history, John Cabot had won the support of King Henry VII of England in 1497. But because of Marin's interference, Europeans knew that America was not India, and their enthusiasm suddenly decreased. Coupled with the terrible legend of syphilis, the voyage in 1497 did not take place. However, John Cabot did not give up his efforts. So he changed his lobbying strategy and persuaded Henry VII that even if the savage continent was not Asia, it also had vast land. Britain is just an island country with a small territory. Why doesn't your Majesty go to the savage continent to occupy some colonies? In 1504, Henry VII was finally persuaded. However, the stingy Henry VII only gave John Cabot a small boat and 18 sailors. In Henry VII's view, even if John Cabot failed, he would only lose a small boat and 18 sailors, which was a small loss. If he succeeds, he can also make a lot of money. Fortunately, John Cabot broke into the Newfoundland fishing grounds, saw the fishing boats sent by the East Frisian Cape Breton Island colony to fish, and followed the fishing boats of Cape Breton Island to Sydney, the capital of Cape Breton Island. Although John Cabot was cautious, he was finally captured by Garland, who had learned a few tricks from Marin. In this way, the British side will not know the news from North America. But this is not the point. Garland is worried that since the British have the first expedition, there may be a second one. Moreover, they don't know whether the British only took John Cabot's team. Moreover, it is unknown whether France will have similar actions. Therefore, Garland needs Marin's guidance and decision-making. Marin was also very unhappy with the British intervening in the North American colonies. Obviously, it was right for him to pit the British at the beginning. After all, Britain is a maritime country and it is easy to become Marin's competitor. Moreover, Britain controls the English Channel, which is a serious threat to Marin's great voyage. The fate of the Netherlands, the sea coachman, in history, is a lesson for us. Originally, the Netherlands was a very powerful maritime country, known as the sea coachman, and controlled most of the maritime trade share. However, the Netherlands was unlucky enough to meet the rising Britain. Although the maritime strength was stronger, the British relied on the advantage of the English Channel to frequently intercept Dutch merchant ships, crack down on the Dutch maritime trade, and launched 3 Anglo-Dutch wars, finally bringing down the Dutch. Since then, Britain has replaced the Netherlands and become the maritime hegemon. Therefore, Britain, which controls the English Channel, is definitely a huge threat to Marin's great voyage. Back then, the Second German Empire and the Third German Empire were both brought down by the British maritime blockade. In short, if you want to go to the ocean, there are only 2 choices for Britain. One is to find ways to bring it down and never let it have the opportunity to rise, the second is to directly annex Britain. Or, at least occupy the area along the English Channel coast of Britain and control the strait in your own hands. As for whether to adopt the first method or the second method, Marin still needs to wait and see the situation. He naturally wanted to adopt the second method, but in Europe, which pays attention to bloodline, this seems difficult to do. Therefore, Marin is still watching the situation. However, Marin is absolutely intolerant of the British exploring new routes. Therefore, he decided to take a positive response. As for how to deal with it, Marin had learned away from the original British in history, that is, to use pirates to intercept ships from other countries to ensure that other countries cannot get involved in America. The specific method is very simple, that is, Marin sent a fleet, hoisted a pirate flag, and in the name of pirates, prevented any British expedition ship from going to North America. Once discovered, the ship was sunk, and the people on board were also put into sacks and sank into the sea. In the end, all the responsibility was put on the pirates. After all, this is indeed the usual modus operandi of pirates. As long as the ships of the British exploring new routes are destroyed and all the personnel are killed, then Britain has not even completed the exploration of new routes, and it is impossible to go to America and Marin to grab territory. To this end, Marin decided to select a group of trusted captains and sailors to form a pirate fleet, hang a skull flag, and cruise specifically on the route from Britain to North America in the North Atlantic. As long as non-East Frisian ships are found, whether they are British, French, or Danish ships, they will be sunk, and no one on the ship will be spared. Although this approach is cruel, it is the reality. If you want to keep it secret, you have to do this. Moreover, this kind of thing is very confidential and must not be leaked. The British crew is okay, just kill them. Marin is not afraid of Britain with a lot of trouble. But France is different. If you intercept a French ship, you will be soft-hearted for a while and leave a survivor. As long as the survivor escapes and brings the news back to France, it will be over. France is the overlord of Europe and is not far from East Frisia. If France deliberately makes trouble for Marin, it will be unbearable. Don't say that the French army failed in Italy, but that's because Italy is too far away from mainland France and needs to cover the Alps. The French can't send too many troops to Italy. But East Frisia is not too far from France, and it is all plains all the way, so it is easy for France to gather a large army and push over. Not only that, the French may also unite with anti-Marin factions in the Holy Roman Empire, such as Frederick III, Elector of Saxony, and Joachim I, Elector of Brandenburg. And the unlucky Danish King Hans. If these major forces unite, Marin will be dead. Therefore, if the disguised pirate fleet catches the French expedition ship, it must kill all the people on the ship, and no one can be left alive. The only safest way is to push the problem to the pirates. As for the pirate ship, Marin actually plans to build a few new pirate ships similar to the Black Pearl. After all, Marin also liked to watch the Pirates of the Caribbean series of movies in his previous life. Unfortunately, it takes a long time to design and build a new ship. If the British or French obtain information about the new route when the ship is not completed, it will be over. Therefore, Marin needed a warship that could be used immediately. Marin thought of the most powerful Hoffman-class battleship and 250-class armed merchant ship in his hands, but he quickly rejected them. Why? Because the characteristics of these two shipowners Friesland were too obvious, and outsiders could tell at a glance that they were Marin's ships. If an enemy ship escaped, Marin would be exposed. Therefore, Marin needed a warship that would not expose its own characteristics. Then, Marin thought of the cog sailing ship. Because of the compensation from Denmark, Marin still had quite a few cog sailing ships. However, this kind of sailing ship has a disadvantage, which is that it is not suitable for installing artillery. Because, when it was designed, the cog sailing ship did not plan to install artillery on the side, so the side was generally very thin. In the end, the only options were the Spanish Carrack sailing ship and the Portuguese Caravel sailing ship. Both of these ships can be equipped with artillery. Although they are only light artillery, they are enough to sink civilian ships that dare to explore new routes. Coincidentally, before the last Battle of Jutland, Marin sent people to Spain to buy 17 Carrack sailing ships. Isn't this a ready-made pirate ship? The Spanish ship type will not make people suspect Marin, which is very suitable. Even if the enemy ship escapes, they will not know that it was the work of East Frisia. Because these ships are popular ship types in Spain and Portugal. Next, it is the relevant matters of forming a pirate fleet. Marin decided to select the best 8 ships from the 17 Clark armed merchant ships, cruise in the Atlantic day and night, hang the pirate skull flag, and remove all objects that highlight the identity of East Frisia. When seeing the ships sailing west from Britain and France, they were all sunk. Even if the other side escaped, the enemy would not infer that Marin was behind the scenes through the skull flag and the ship. If you encounter a large-scale fleet of Britain and France, the pirate ship, with a telescope can start running 20 kilometers in advance, leaving the enemy staring blankly. In addition, in the future, Marin also plans to develop another pirate fleet to cruise on the route to the Caribbean west of the Canary Islands. After all, Spain has announced that it has given up America. In the future, as long as he sees Spanish or Portuguese ships heading west, Marin can also let the pirate fleet sink them to prevent them from coveting the American continent. As long as you select reliable confidants and keep your hands clean and don't leave any survivors, others will not know the relationship between Marin and those pirates. The terrible legends on the savage continent, coupled with the pirates who kill without blinking an eye. Before seeing the crazy benefits, Marin didn't believe that there would be so many people willing to die. As for how to deal with John Cabot, Marin thought about it and decided to keep him. After all, he is also a navigator. Of course, for now, he and his 3 sons are under house arrest on Cape Breton Island. As for the 18 British sailors, Marin waved his pen and gave instructions, take them all to the North Sydney coal mining area to dig coal. Chapter 344, The Heart of the Italian War. Although the issue of colonial division between Spain and Portugal was quickly resolved, Marin did not intend to go back. Because George's army had already gathered and planned to attack West Frisia. Although Maximilian I did not send troops from Austria, he asked his son, King Philip the Handsome, to send 4,000 lowland elites, the soldiers of the Flemish corps, to participate in the battle. In the final analysis, it was Burgundy, that is, the lowland area, that owed the Duchy of Saxony a favor. Since the large tracts of inland Burgundy territory were taken away by France, the Duchy of Burgundy has only a few areas such as Franche-Comté in the inland area. The core area of Burgundy, mainly the administrative centre, was also moved to Ghent, the capital of Flanders, the most developed region in the Netherlands. Prince Philip grew up in Ghent, surrounded by the Dutch parliamentarians. The rebellion in Flanders in 1492 was suppressed by the previous Duke of Saxony, Albrecht, who personally led the army. Although, in the end, Maximilian I generously gave the West Frisian noble republic to Duke Albrecht. However, the loan of 300,000 gold coins provided by the Duchy of Saxony to Maximilian I did not have to be repaid. In essence, it was a deal. The specific content is that the Duchy of Saxony paid 300,000 gold coins to the poor Emperor Maximilian I, and Maximilian I awarded West Frisia, an independent country that did not originally belong to him, to the Duchy of Saxony. Of course, this did not repay the Duchy of Saxony's favor. After all, they also gave 300,000 gold coins. This time, the Saxons came to ask for this favor. So, Maximilian I needed to send troops to help. Of course, Maximilian I directly asked his son to send troops. After all, the favor was owed by the Netherlands. It is natural that the Netherlands should be responsible for sending troops. Although Prince Philip is unfeeling, he is still a disciplined nobleman. So, he drew 4,000 men from the most elite Flemish corps in the lowlands to help Duke George and attack West Frisia together. In this regard, although Marin avoided joining the coalition, he had to provide convenience for the army to pass through because of the emperor. Although he left East Frisia, before leaving, Marin instructed Schwartz to provide convenience for the passing army. But at the same time, Marin also asked Schwartz to provide specific information to the Duchy of Guedes. In this regard, Marin specially sent someone to greet Charles II, Duke of Guedes. It's not that the brothers are unwilling to help, but that the brothers' boss, the emperor, actually wants the brothers to fight against you together. In order to take into account the loyalty of the allies and the loyalty to the emperor at the same time, the brothers can only run away. Of course, for the army of the Duchy of Guedes, Marin supported a large number of French standard weapons and armor, which looked like they were supported by the French. In fact, the French did support the Duchy of Guedes. Maximilian I was hostile to the growth of France and blocked their expansion in Italy. How could the French not be hostile to the Holy Roman Empire? You know, the Holy Roman Empire is currently the only empire in Europe. As long as Maximilian I is crowned, he will be the only legitimate emperor in Europe. As for the Eastern Roman throne sold to Maximilian I by Andreas Palaiologos, the French resolutely refused to recognize it. You know, the last crown of the Eastern Roman Empire is still in the hands of the French. It was bought by Charles VIII back then. How could they recognize Maximilian I's identity as the Eastern Roman Emperor? Moreover, the French believed that France's national strength was no less than that of the Holy Roman Empire, and the title of the Roman Emperor could also be fought for by the French. Therefore, the French desperately wanted to participate in the Italian War. In addition to coveting the richness of the Italian region, occupying the Roman homeland and seizing the throne of the Roman Empire from the Germans was also one of the ultimate pursuits of the French. After all, legally speaking, the king is one level higher than the emperor. When the king sees the emperor, he must salute. For example, among the 7 electors of the Holy Roman Empire, the highest-ranking one among the 4 secular electors is the King of Bohemia. But even the King of Bohemia is just a vassal of the emperor. Strictly speaking, the Roman Emperor is the highest secular monarch in Europe, while the Pope is the highest religious leader in Europe. One of them manages secular affairs, and the other manages religious affairs, and in theory they have the same status. When the king sees the Pope, he sometimes even has to kiss the boots. Of course, the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire is relatively weak under the pull of the princes. Therefore, the Holy Roman Emperor, who is nominally equal to the Pope, is actually inferior to the Pope. This point became increasingly obvious after the Canossa Confession incident of the Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV. Therefore, the actual situation in Europe is that the Pope is the most honorable. The second is the Holy Roman Emperor, and then the King. Next is the Elector, and the Duke is even inferior. However, France is particularly powerful because it has completed centralization. The strength of the French king has surpassed that of the Holy Roman Emperor. This made the French ambition swell, and they were dissatisfied with the fact that the Holy Roman Emperor had a higher status than themselves. As long as Italy was occupied, the King of France would not only have more fertile and rich land, but would also directly surround Rome, where the Holy See was located. In this way, France not only gained the inside, but also could take the opportunity to compete for the position of Roman Emperor and gain face. Once all of Italy was occupied, France would be able to force the Holy See to abolish the title of the Holy Roman Empire and give the position of Roman Emperor to the King of France. After all, the throne of the Holy Roman Empire was also given to the Germans by the Pope. Obviously, the French wanted to conquer Italy, not only to gain land, but also to gain the throne. Once the land of Italy and the title of Roman Emperor were obtained, the French power would be unstoppable. On the contrary, the Holy Roman Empire, that is, Germany, which had lost its emperor position, would sink completely. Of course, the most severely sunk was definitely the Habsburg dynasty. Maximilian I was obviously a smart monarch. He saw the great ambitions of the French and felt the great crisis. Therefore, although Maximilian I had no ability, mainly no financial resources, to participate in the Italian War, he still joined the camp against the French without hesitation. Even if he could not dominate Italy, he would never let the French succeed. This was the idea of Maximilian I. However, within Germany, the confrontation between the princes and Maximilian I was irreconcilable. Moreover, those stupid princes did not understand what terrible consequences would happen to Germany if the French seized Italy. Moreover, Maximilian I was actually a little uncertain about the idea that the French wanted to compete for the throne. He just instinctively felt that if France seized Italy, it would be a great threat to Germany. However, this reason was not sufficient for the German princes to support him in opposing the expansion of the French in Italy. Only Marin, a traverser from later generations, could carefully analyze the ideas of the French from the perspective of an observer. In fact, when Charles VIII bought the Byzantine crown from the last Eastern Roman Emperor Andreas Palaiologos, it vaguely expressed the French ambition to covet the throne. Therefore, the Italian War was not only about the territory of Italy, but also about the control over the Holy See. Once the Holy See was controlled, it would no longer be a dream to obtain the title of emperor. In short, the core of the Italian War was land and the throne. People of this era tended to think that the French were only coveting the fertile land of Italy, but ignored the fact that the French were coveting the title of Roman Emperor. Chapter 345 Cooling down the sailing fever. As a father-in-law, Julius II naturally knew what his son-in-law Marin was thinking. So, the Pope found some other excuses to keep Marin in Rome. The specific work was mainly to revise the fallacies in some geographical books in the Vatican's collection. Julius II discovered that his son-in-law was definitely a geography master and had some knowledge of the whole world. Even Julius II had to believe that the ascetic monk named Einstein was a real sage. Because the geographical knowledge Einstein taught Marin was too accurate. Although the details may not be clear. However, this was judged by Julius II as his son-in-law's lack of serious study. Or, the great sage named Einstein had too little time to educate his son-in-law. How could he know that his son-in-law's geographical knowledge came from textbooks of later generations? Because textbooks of an introductory nature are naturally not as detailed as professional books. Therefore, Marin has a good grasp of geographical knowledge in general, but the details are not as accurate as those of the navigators. Then, Marin stayed in Rome in the name of helping the Holy See to revise the classics. The first thing Marin did was to completely deny the travels of Marco Polo. Moreover, like writing a paper, he criticized the untrue points in the travels of Marco Polo one by one. Of course, this paper specifically pointed out the errors in the travels of Marco Polo, but deliberately did not give a world map, so as not to let other European powers such as Britain and France get the information and open up routes to the east. In fact, this was Marin's deliberate cooling of the navigation fever that was popular in Europe at that time. Marin believed that if the navigation fever was overheated, it would be inevitable that more Italian navigators, British navigators, and even French navigators and Dutch navigators would participate in the geographical discovery. And this obviously infringed on Marin's interests. In particular, he was very afraid that the British and French would open up routes in the North Atlantic, go to the east coast of America, and discover the richness there. Therefore, Marin must cool down this navigation fever so that other countries will no longer be so keen on great voyages. So, Marin wrote in his paper, "It is impossible to discover India, China and Japan to the west. Columbus has explored them and found that the west is blocked by the savage continent. As for whether it is possible to reach the east by crossing the savage continent, it has not yet been confirmed. But what can be confirmed is that the northernmost part of the savage continent is a land of ice and snow, and the sea is full of icebergs. If a wooden ship hits an iceberg, the only outcome is the destruction of the ship and the death of people. Therefore, the only correct route to the east at present is the route that the Spaniards and Portuguese take from the south to the east." Of course, the main purpose of this paper is to refute the exaggeration in the travels of Marco Polo. Marin even quoted a statement from the later historical community, that is, Marco Polo himself did not reach the East at all, but only reached Persia. He heard about some things in the East from the mouths of Persian merchants who had been to the East. Then, based on those rumors, they fabricated and exaggerated them, and only then did this book, The Travels of Marco Polo, come into being. Marin's argument is that if the East is really as rich as Marco Polo said, and there is gold everywhere, why didn't Marco Polo, who had been to the East, pick up a few bags of gold on the ground and bring them back to Europe? As long as he did this, he would definitely become a millionaire. However, Marco Polo did not become a millionaire. Therefore, what he said was mostly exaggerated false news. Even, he himself may not have been to China. Because, according to the news confirmed by the great sage Einstein, China is very short of gold and silver, and no gold and silver coins have been minted, only copper coins. Moreover, Marin swore in his paper that he could be sure that China had no gold and silver coins, only copper coins. In order to prove it, Marin also drew the appearance of the square-holed copper coins of the Ming dynasty in the book, and wrote the 4 square Chinese characters, Yongla Tongbao, on it to prove it. At the same time, Marin welcomed navigators to explore the Ming Empire to prove the truth of his words. If China has a large number of gold and silver coins issued by the government, he is willing to give up the title of Duke. Such a guarantee that is like gambling everything makes people have to believe. Then, in his paper, Marin also introduced in detail a special currency launched by the Ming Empire to solve the problem of precious metal shortage, treasure notes. Treasure notes are paper money. Marin introduced in detail the reasons for the emergence of treasure notes in the Ming Empire, and later the emperor issued treasure notes in large quantities in order to plunder wealth, which led to the depreciation of treasure notes to the point where no one wanted them. If the Ming Empire court had not forcibly converted part of the official salaries into treasure notes, it is estimated that treasure notes would have become completely waste paper. What Marin didn't know was that his description of treasure notes attracted the attention of King Louis XII of France. Then, the greedy French king also tried to issue paper money. However, because France's official monetary policy was chaotic and too greedy, and paper money was issued indiscriminately, French paper money soon became unpopular. At least, French paper money can't buy anything on the international market. In addition, Marin emphasized the judgment that Japan and North Korea are both poor countries in East Asia. And explained that these countries all need to go to China to purchase the necessary materials, and gladly accept the canonization of the Emperor of the Ming Empire, and be complacent about some of the items rewarded to them by the Ming Empire. For this reason, they did not hesitate to send envoys to kneel 3 times and bow 9 times to the Emperor of the Ming Empire on behalf of their respective kings, and humiliatedly expressed their submission. In fact, there is nothing wrong with Marin's statement. Because the world-famous Iwami silver mine will not discover a large silver vein until 1526. From then on, Japan will become a major silver-producing country. Before that, although Japan produced silver, it was not a lot, but copper mining was more. Therefore, in this era, even if someone went to Japan to confirm it, they did not see the situation of Japan's abundant silver production. What they saw was indeed that Japan was a poor country. Even Korea in this era was richer than Japan. Because Korea bordered the Ming dynasty on land and had many exchanges with Liaodong. This era was not the period of rebellion of the Jurchens in the late Ming dynasty, and Liaodong was still under the jurisdiction of the Ming dynasty. Therefore, Korea was able to conduct commercial exchanges with the Ming dynasty on land smoothly. After all, Goryeo ginseng was still very popular among the people of the Ming dynasty. Although the Ming Empire banned sea trade, it did not ban land trade. Therefore, Korea's life at this time was much better than Japan. Of course, Marin did not write so much detail in the paper, but only introduced to Europeans that Japan and Korea were short of domestic materials and many things needed to be purchased from the Ming dynasty. And this is a true description, even if someone confirms it, it is not afraid. Julius II strongly supported Marin's behavior of cooling down the seafaring fever. After all, he also knew that America would be the territory of his own grandson Caesar in the future. If it was discovered and robbed by Britain, France and other countries, it would be bad. Therefore, after getting Marin's guarantee that these statements are definitely true, Julius II used the name of the Vatican to officially promote Marin's paper. If it were in the later China, it would be equivalent to making the headlines in the People's Daily and being given the super treatment of editor's note. Chapter 346, Unlucky England. As a father-in-law, Julius II naturally knew what his son-in-law Marin was thinking. So, the Pope found some other excuses to keep Marin in Rome. The specific work was mainly to revise the fallacies in some geographical books in the Vatican's collection. Julius II discovered that his son-in-law was definitely a geography master and had some knowledge of the whole world. Even Julius II had to believe that the ascetic monk named Einstein was a real sage. Because the geographical knowledge Einstein taught Marin was too accurate. Although the details may not be clear. However, this was judged by Julius II as his son-in-law's lack of serious study. Or, the great sage named Einstein had too little time to educate his son-in-law. How could he know that his son-in-law's geographical knowledge came from textbooks of later generations? Because textbooks of an introductory nature are naturally not as detailed as professional books. Therefore, Marin has a good grasp of geographical knowledge in general, but the details are not as accurate as those of the navigators. Then, Marin stayed in Rome in the name of helping the Holy See to revise the classics. The first thing Marin did was to completely deny the travels of Marco Polo. Moreover, like writing a paper, he criticized the untrue points in the travels of Marco Polo one by one. Of course, this paper specifically pointed out the errors in the travels of Marco Polo, but deliberately did not give a world map, so as not to let other European powers such as Britain and France get the information and open up routes to the east. In fact, this was Marin's deliberate cooling of the navigation fever that was popular in Europe at that time. Marin believed that if the navigation fever was overheated, it would be inevitable that more Italian navigators, British navigators, and even French navigators and Dutch navigators would participate in the geographical discovery. And this obviously infringed on Marin's interests. In particular, he was very afraid that the British and French would open up routes in the North Atlantic, go to the east coast of America, and discover the richness there. Therefore, Marin must cool down this navigation fever so that other countries will no longer be so keen on great voyages. So, Marin wrote in his paper, "It is impossible to discover India, China and Japan to the west. Columbus has explored them and found that the west is blocked by the savage continent. As for whether it is possible to reach the east by crossing the savage continent, it has not yet been confirmed. But what can be confirmed is that the northernmost part of the savage continent is a land of ice and snow, and the sea is full of icebergs. If a wooden ship hits an iceberg, the only outcome is the destruction of the ship and the death of people. Therefore, the only correct route to the east at present is the route that the Spaniards and Portuguese take from the south to the east." Of course, the main purpose of this paper is to refute the exaggeration in the travels of Marco Polo. Marin even quoted a statement from the later historical community, that is, Marco Polo himself did not reach the east at all, but only reached Persia. He heard about some things in the east from the mouths of Persian merchants who had been to the east. Then, based on those rumors, they fabricated and exaggerated them, and only then did this book, The Travels of Marco Polo, come into being. Marin's argument is that if the East is really as rich as Marco Polo said, and there is gold everywhere, why didn't Marco Polo, who had been to the East, pick up a few bags of gold on the ground and bring them back to Europe? As long as he did this, he would definitely become a millionaire. However, Marco Polo did not become a millionaire. Therefore, what he said was mostly exaggerated false news. Even, he himself may not have been to China. Because, according to the news confirmed by the great sage Einstein, China is very short of gold and silver, and no gold and silver coins have been minted, only copper coins. Moreover, Marin swore in his paper that he could be sure that China had no gold and silver coins, only copper coins. In order to prove it, Marin also drew the appearance of the square-holed copper coins of the Ming dynasty in the book, and wrote the 4 square Chinese characters, Yongle Tong Bao, on it to prove it. At the same time, Marin welcomed navigators to explore the Ming Empire to prove the truth of his words. If China has a large number of gold and silver coins issued by the government, he is willing to give up the title of Duke. Such a guarantee that is like gambling everything makes people have to believe. Then, in his paper, Marin also introduced in detail a special currency launched by the Ming Empire to solve the problem of precious metal shortage, treasure notes. Treasure notes are paper money. Marin introduced in detail the reasons for the emergence of treasure notes in the Ming Empire, and later the emperor issued treasure notes in large quantities in order to plunder wealth, which led to the depreciation of treasure notes to the point where no one wanted them. If the Ming Empire court had not forcibly converted part of the official salaries into treasure notes, it is estimated that treasure notes would have become completely waste paper. What Marin didn't know was that his description of treasure notes attracted the attention of King Louis XII of France. Then, the greedy French king also tried to issue paper money. However, because France's official monetary policy was chaotic and too greedy, and paper money was issued indiscriminately, French paper money soon became unpopular. At least, French paper money can't buy anything on the international market. In addition, Marin emphasized the judgment that Japan and North Korea are both poor countries in East Asia. and explained that these countries all need to go to China to purchase the necessary materials, and gladly accept the canonization of the Emperor of the Ming Empire, and be complacent about some of the items rewarded to them by the Ming Empire. For this reason, they did not hesitate to send envoys to kneel 3 times and bow 9 times to the Emperor of the Ming Empire on behalf of their respective kings, and humiliatedly expressed their submission. In fact, there is nothing wrong with Marin's statement. Because the world-famous Iwami silver mine will not discover a large silver vein until 1526. From then on, Japan will become a major silver-producing country. Before that, although Japan produced silver, it was not a lot, but copper mining was more. Therefore, in this era, even if someone went to Japan to confirm it, they did not see the situation of Japan's abundant silver when Marin hid in Rome to write his thesis. The northern part of England was already in a mess. According to Marin's suggestion, the Scottish army retreated northward in 2 parts. But before retreating northward, the Scottish army robbed all the food along the way, destroyed all the crops, killed all the livestock, and even the guard dogs, and made them into jerky. In this way, the Scottish army went north with sufficient food, and the people in several counties in northern England were in trouble. Their property and food were robbed by the Scottish army, the crops were all destroyed, and even the livestock were killed. It was okay when the Scottish army just withdrew. After all, everyone could still find grass roots, bark, dead leaves and other things to eat. In addition, the animal viscera and leather left by the Scots when they killed all the livestock can also be cooked and eaten. However, after eating all these things, the local people felt that they were going to die. So, while they still had strength, experienced people began to drag their families and flee south to escape famine, begging all the way to find a way to survive. In ancient times, due to low grain production, once a natural disaster occurred in a certain year, some poor farmers would have to flee famine and beg in areas without famine to survive the disaster year. Whether it is China or Europe, this is a very normal phenomenon. Of course, there is a premise, that is, these farmers must be free people. If they are serfs, they cannot flee famine at will. Because they must obtain the consent of the serf owners to leave their homes. But in the 15th century, the serfdom in Britain and France had basically collapsed, and most farmers became self-employed farmers. At the same time, the German region still generally retained the serfdom system. It was not until the 19th century that Prussia began to reform the serfdom system. Because they were self-employed farmers, the British farmers were free to flee. When the British army completed the sweep of the area controlled by Earl Edward in eastern Ireland and tried every means to land on the west coast of England, they saw the extremely depressed counties in northern England. Upon inquiry, the British commander Richard Bull was shocked. It turned out that the Scottish army actually adopted a similar strategy to the British army against parts of eastern Ireland in several counties in northern England. This made Richard Bull's scalp numb. Because they would pass through several northern counties full of famine. Sure enough, when they were marching along the way, local youths often risked their lives to steal the British army's food in the middle of the night. You know, that was military rations. Moreover, it was military rations piled up in the barracks, not military rations transported on the way. So, those hungry young people were basically gambling with their lives to steal food. Richard Bull was very angry at first, and executed some of the local youths who came to steal military rations, and hung their bodies outside the barracks. But compared with the fear of starving to death, what was this threat? Anyway, without food, they would starve to death. In addition, there were a large number of old and weak people who surrounded the military camp, begging the British soldiers to give them some food. Many soldiers who were originally from the local area were immediately moved, especially some English longbowmen who came from the northern counties were completely shocked by the tragedy. They began to exchange their saved food for news. Mainly, to find out the news of their relatives. In the refugee group outside the camp, many English longbowmen found some familiar faces. Even a few longbowmen met their families who were fleeing famine. Richard Bull originally planned to drive these refugees away, but he was strongly resisted by more than 800 longbowmen from the northern counties, which almost caused a mutiny. These soldiers from the northern counties did not want to see their elders and fellow villagers starve to death in front of them. Although the soldiers from other regions did not openly resist, they felt sympathetic and supported the soldiers from the northern counties to help the refugees. In fact, there were not only more than 800 longbowmen from the northern counties, but also dozens of knights. However, the knights were nobles, not the same as the civilians. Therefore, the knights did not care much about the refugees, they only cared about their families. But the longbowmen were different. The longbowmen were a special class in England. They did not belong to the nobility, but because of their combat effectiveness, the country gave them certain privileges, making them a class between the nobility and the civilians. But in the final analysis, they still came from the civilian class. Therefore, they still cared about their elders and fellow countrymen. The longbowmen in other regions also supported the relief of the refugees. After all, no one could guarantee that the elders in their hometown would never be affected by disasters. Under the pressure of the longbowman class, Richard Bull had to compromise. Anyway, they robbed all the food and killed all the livestock in the area controlled by Earl Edward on the island of Ireland. Therefore, they had a lot of food and dried meat. So, Richard Bull took out some food and dried meat to help some refugees outside the camp. But unexpectedly, because of this move, the refugees began to spread the news that there is food in the barracks, and the officers are also willing to help the refugees. Then, a scene that frightened Richard Bull appeared in a few days. 50,000 to 60,000 refugees from the surrounding area surrounded Richard Bull's camp, making it impossible for the British Army to go north to pursue the Scottish Army. If the refugees were not helped, it might arouse the anger of those refugees and cause them to attack the barracks. Thinking of such terrible consequences, Richard Bull began to regret his action of helping the refugees. However, now he is also riding a tiger and it is difficult to get off. Moreover, he has no idea of going north. Because, on the way north, he will meet more refugees. In desperation, Richard Bull had to let the soldiers quietly take the remaining food in the middle of the night one day, suddenly leave the barracks, and retreat to the south in a hurry, intending to go to the area that was not destroyed by the Scottish army to avoid the army being surrounded by refugees. When the refugees learned that the army had suddenly run away, they also ran south. In this way, a spectacle appeared in the north of England. Richard Bull fled south with 1.8 million British troops in a hurry. However, it was not because he was chased by the enemy, but because he was chased by tens of thousands of refugees. When the news reached London, the government and the public were shocked. Henry VII and his ministers were also numbed by the more than 300,000 refugees in the northern counties, and they didn't know what to do. The English court had no ability to provide relief for these more than 300,000 refugees. However, if they were left alone, it would easily lead to big problems. Therefore, the English court was in a dilemma. In fact, if there were only a few thousand or tens of thousands of refugees, the English court might have sent troops to capture and suppress them directly. Even massacres were not impossible, as long as they were done in a hidden way. However, that was more than 300,000 people, more than 1/10 of the current total population of England. Therefore, violent means would not work. If you dare to suppress and massacre casually, it may cause dissatisfaction and even riots throughout the country. Henry VII discussed with the civil and military officials of the court for several days, but failed to come up with a suitable solution. The king and his ministers were all worried and didn't know what to do. Production. What they saw was indeed that Japan was a poor country. Even Korea in this era was richer than Japan. Because Korea bordered the Ming dynasty on land and had many exchanges with Liaodong. This era was not the period of rebellion of the Jurchens in the late Ming dynasty, and Liaodong was still under the jurisdiction of the Ming dynasty. Therefore, Korea was able to conduct commercial exchanges with the Ming dynasty on land smoothly. After all, Goryeo ginseng was still very popular among the people of the Ming dynasty. Although the Ming Empire banned sea trade, it did not ban land trade. Therefore, Korea's life at this time was much better than Japan. Of course, Marin did not write so much detail in the paper, but only introduced to Europeans that Japan and Korea were short of domestic materials and many things needed to be purchased from the Ming dynasty. And this is a true description. Even if someone confirms it, it is not afraid. Julius II strongly supported Marin's behavior of cooling down the seafaring fever. After all, he also knew that America would be the territory of his own grandson Caesar in the future. If it was discovered and robbed by Britain, France and other countries, it would be bad. Therefore, after getting Marin's guarantee that these statements are definitely true, Julius II used the name of the Vatican to officially promote Marin's paper. If it were in the later China, it would be equivalent to making the headlines in the People's Daily and being given the super treatment of editor's note. Chapter 347, The Dilemma of Earl Edward. In this disaster, it is not just the counties in northern England that are unlucky. Also unlucky are the Crown's direct territories controlled by Earl Edward, the McMorrow dynasty territories and the county of Kildare. There are nearly 100,000 people here, including the army. Although Marin had previously transported £6 million of rye to Earl Edward, it was only enough for the army in Dublin. If it was shared with the 70,000 or 80,000 people in the country, it would not last long. Therefore, although the British army retreated, it did not mean that Earl Edward's troubles were gone. On the contrary, the trouble has only just begun. Now, the English fleet has blocked the north and south exits of the Irish Sea. If you want to continue to transport food to support Earl Edward, you have to ask the English fleet if they agree. Although, if Marin is ruthless, he can also concentrate all the warships to destroy the British fleet. After all, the British warships are still backward cog sailing ships, which are not enough to withstand the bombardment of Marin's warships. However, in such a large-scale naval battle, the consumption of gunpowder is too fierce, and Marin can't afford it now. Even if they win, the gunpowder will be used up. Once there is no gunpowder reserve, Marin's Spanish phalanx will become a decoration, and so many matchlock guns will not be able to shoot. This will greatly reduce the combat effectiveness of the East Frisian army, so Marin does not intend to adopt this method. Moreover, destroying the British fleet will easily make wedding clothes for the French. If Britain loses its naval advantage, it will be easy for the French to launch another Norman invasion. If the French take the opportunity to occupy England, Marin will probably have the idea of hanging himself. Why? The French demon is already the overlord of the European continent. If it controls England again, then the English Channel will be completely controlled by the French. At that time, if Marin wants to engage in great navigation, he will be strangled by the French and be extremely passive. Therefore, Marin would rather deal with England later than see the French occupy England. Because the consequences are too serious. France is originally a land tyrant, and then occupying England to make up for the shortcomings at sea. By then, there will be a super monster competing for hegemony between land and sea. Even though Marin was a time traveler, it would be difficult for him to get away with it. By then, America might be swallowed up by France. Therefore, Marin had to give up the tempting idea of attacking the English fleet. However, if he did not attack the British fleet, there was no way to transport food to Edward. If there was not enough food, Marin could foresee riots in Ireland. By then, Edward would be unable to find trouble for Henry VII. Marin estimated that if the millions of pounds of food in Edward's hands were distributed to civilians, as long as they ate sparingly, they would be able to support 2 or 3 months. But if they could not find a new source of food after 2 or 3 months, it would be over. Therefore, a new source of food must be found for Edward to allow Edward to continue to threaten Henry VII. Marin, who was in Rome, spread out the map of Ireland while writing his thesis and began to look for a solution to the problem. After opening the map, Marin scanned the current map of Ireland and suddenly realized that he seemed to have overlooked the county of Ormond, which was sandwiched between the county of Kildare and the county of Desmond. Although the county of Ormond was not as large as the county of Desmond, it was much larger than the county of Kildare. Although the land was not as fertile as the peat soil of the county of Kildare, it was also a large vassal state. The most critical thing was that the western border of the county of Ormond was the famous Shannon River. Limerick at the mouth of the Shannon River was an important port in Western Ireland. According to the news sent by his spies, due to the limited naval strength, the English fleet currently only blocked the upper and lower exits of the Irish Sea. As for the coastal areas in other directions of the island of Ireland, England was really unable to take care of them. Therefore, as long as Earl Edward sent troops to capture the county of Ormond, he would arrive at the Shannon River. Although Limerick and the seaport were under the control of the Irish native kingdom of Thomond, its strength was no match for Earl Edward. If Earl Edward was willing to use the Shannon River to transport grain, it would be fine. If not, what would the harm in destroying it? Moreover, Earl Maurice of the county of Desmond was a big ambitious man who had long been alienated from King Henry VII of England. As long as Earl Edward was willing to give up most of the territory of the county of Ormond to him, this guy would definitely be willing to send troops to help conquer the county of Ormond. At that time, as long as Earl Edward reached the Shannon River, he would be able to obtain food supplies from the west coast of the island of Ireland. As soon as Marin's grain transport ship arrived, England's grain blockade against Earl Edward lost all its effect. As long as Earl Edward survived this difficult time, he would maintain a strong deterrent against England. After all, Earl Edward was also a member of the British royal family with a red seedling, more orthodox than Henry VII. As long as Earl Edward existed, Henry VII would have trouble sleeping and eating. Moreover, whether it is Marin, France or Scotland, they are all happy to see England in trouble. Moreover, the French and the Scots also control a degree, that is, neither let Henry VII have a good time, nor let Earl Edward's power expand and surpass the current King Henry VII of England. It is best that the strength of the two is balanced. In this way, England will fall into endless wars. Then, there will be no threat to France and Scotland. Otherwise, if the support for Earl Edward is too strong, resulting in Earl Edward defeating Henry VII and restoring the York dynasty, it will be hard to say. Maybe one day in the future, Earl Edward will lead England to become strong again, and then threaten France and Scotland. Therefore, the French and the Scots never want Earl Edward to be finished, but they also don't want Earl Edward to suppress Henry VII. What they hope most is that Edward and Henry VII fight to the death, beat England into a mess, and it is difficult to stabilize. This situation is in the best interests of the two countries. Of course, if possible, King James IV of Scotland also hopes to go south to occupy a large area of England for himself. The French may not want to follow the example of their predecessor, William the Conqueror, and launch another Norman conquest against England. So, don't expect France and Scotland to fully support Earl Edward. Even Marin, who has great support, is the same as France and Scotland. Marin now hopes that Edward can bring great trouble to Henry VII, but he doesn't want Edward to be too powerful. However, for now, the most important issue is to let Earl Edward survive the difficulties. Otherwise, if he can't even get through this level, let alone cause trouble for Henry VII. Marin called his trusted subordinates and asked him to send the letter with the relevant strategy back to East Frisia as soon as possible. Then, send a speedboat to break into the Irish Sea at night and deliver it to Earl Edward. With the method provided by Marin, Earl Edward's predicament will be solved. As long as Earl Edward survives this difficulty, he will be able to maintain a strong deterrent to Henry VII in the future. In short, don't let England live in peace. Chapter 348 Newcastle's coal supply cuts off. Although they were at a loss as to what to do with the more than 300,000 refugees, Henry VII and his ministers understood that they must not let the refugees reach London. Otherwise, the capital would be in turmoil. So, after much deliberation, Henry VII ordered Sir Richard Pole's 18,000 troops to stop retreating southward and set up a defence line in the northern border areas of Cambridgeshire, Northamptonshire and Norfolk to prevent refugees from crossing the defence line and heading south. As for the unaffected areas such as Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire and Leicestershire to the north of the defence line, they were temporarily abandoned and the refugees were allowed to pour in. As for Staffordshire and Cheshire to the west, refugees were also allowed to pour in. The English court's plan was to protect the richest southeastern region from the impact of refugees. As for the central counties, let them be. And those nobles whose territories were damaged would be compensated in the future. For example, Henry VII's stepfather, Earl of Derbyshire, Thomas Stanley, had his Derbyshire fiefdom looted by the Scottish army. Because of their deep hatred for Thomas Stanley's evil plot, the Scottish army, under the instruction of King James IV of Scotland, plundered Derbyshire thoroughly. However, Derbyshire was Thomas Stanley's territory. Who was Thomas Stanley? He was Henry VII's stepfather. Moreover, Thomas Stanley was one of the most important contributors to Henry VII's victory over Richard III and his seizure of the throne. If it weren't for Thomas Stanley and his men as internal supporters, or even defecting before the battle, Richard III might not have lost to Henry VII. In fact, his chances of winning were much greater than Henry VII's. After all, Henry VII only brought 2,000 French mercenaries to land in England, and later in the decisive battle, there were only 5,000 troops. It was also because Richard III was careless that he only brought 10,000 troops to fight. But among these 10,000 troops, 3,000 of them turned against their allies. William Stanley, Thomas Stanley's younger brother, turned against his allies with 3,000 troops, while Thomas Stanley remained motionless with 1,000 troops, and the Earl of Northumberland's 2,000 troops also remained motionless. In other words, 3,000 of Richard III's 10,000 troops turned against their allies, and another 3,000 remained motionless. In the end, only the 4,000 troops led by Richard III and the 5,000 troops led by Henry VII and the 3,000 rebels who turned against their allies led by William Stanley were left to fight. At this time, the ratio of the forces of both sides changed from 2 to 1 to 1 to 2. Moreover, Richard III was still attacked from all sides, and it would be strange if he was not defeated. But the situation is very different now. Richard III killed his nephew and usurped the throne, which angered the aristocracy and led to his betrayal by his relatives and friends, so he was rebelled by Henry VII with a few thousand people. What Earl Edward encountered was a united English court. Therefore, let alone landing with a few thousand people, even landing with an army of 10,000, the possibility of failure is extremely high. Earl Edward also knew this, and with the lesson of the failure of the fake Richard, he did not rashly send troops to England, but first consolidated his territory in Ireland. He would not send troops to England until the rear was stable. The core of England is the several counties around London in the southeast. Moreover, the population is also concentrated here. Therefore, the government and the people of England understand that at this juncture, the most important thing is not to let refugees flood into London. Even, they cannot be allowed to destroy the counties around London. As for the counties in the middle, it is enough to be used for the refugees. As for the life and death of the people in the counties in the middle, Henry VII did not care. The other nobles did not care either. As for the nobles in the counties in the middle, they would get some compensation afterwards. Anyway, there would be no share for the common people. As for the labor force in the nobles' territories, it's very simple. Just hire and recruit from the surviving common people. Anyway, after the scourge of the refugees, the surviving common people must have nothing. If they don't work for the nobles, how can they survive? In this way, Henry VII and his ministers made a cruel decision, to let the more than 300,000 refugees harm the three counties of Lincoln, Nottingham and Leicester in the central part, and Cheshire and Staffordshire in the west. The suffering of the people in several counties in the central part was exchanged for peace in the southern part. It is no joke for refugees to cross the border. Although European refugees do not have the idea of kings, princes, generals and ministers are of the same species as Chinese refugees, it is normal for bandits to emerge. By then, the areas where the bandits are active will certainly be in dire straits. Afterwards, all the English court had to do was to suppress the bandits, or simply win over the bandits and incorporate them into the army. As for the lives of civilians, who cares? However, this riot brought a huge trouble to Marin, that is, the coal supply in Newcastle was cut off. After all, the city of Newcastle was breached by the Scottish army and looted as a whole. At this time, all the people in Newcastle were planning to flee from famine, so who would have the heart to dig coal? However, the fuel for the salt boiling base and cement plant on Baltrum Island mainly relies on Newcastle for supply. So, the person in charge of Baltrum Island, whose coal supply was cut off, urgently reported to Prime Minister Geoffrey. Then, Geoffrey sent people to the south at full speed to ask Marin how to deal with it. Damn, am I considered to be mistaken? Marin thought with a headache. It is impossible to transfer coal from the Ruhr area in a short time, and buying a large amount of coal from the Ruhr area may attract the attention of interested people. After all, it is difficult not to attract attention to transport coal from the Ruhr area through multiple countries. Only buying coal from the port of Newcastle is concealed enough. Therefore, Marin will now have to intervene in the affairs of England. At least, he has to intervene in the affairs of the Newcastle area. Now, the coal mines in Newcastle have basically stopped working. Last time, Marin's coal ship went there, but the locals did not accept money, but only food. Even the food on the ship was robbed by the people of Newcastle. If there were no fishing nets on the ship, and the crew's food problem was solved by casting nets on the return journey, perhaps the crew would have starved to death. After thinking again and again, Marin believed that Newcastle was too chaotic now. It would be difficult to obtain coal there by normal means. Even if Marin sent people to transport food, it would be easy to be violently robbed by the locals. Therefore, this time when sending people to Newcastle, it might be necessary to send troops to calm the situation. Otherwise, the starving English could not be stopped. However, the army could not be sent openly. Otherwise, it would be a blatant offense to England. Therefore, the best way is to send a group of soldiers in the name of the Chamber of Commerce, in the name of mercenaries, to control the coal mines and docks in Newcastle, and use food to hire local people to help dig and transport coal. Then, transport it to Baltrum Island. For this reason, Marin specifically asked his men to use the name of the Dutch Chamber of Commerce and mobilized 2,000 mercenaries, wearing French breastplates and helmets, holding long hair, to go to Newcastle to settle the situation. As for muskets, they cannot be used. In particular, the Marin phalanx cannot be arranged. Otherwise, no matter how stupid the English are, they can guess that it was Marin's work. However, the Marin phalanx that uses muskets on a large scale cannot be used, but the scattered formation that uses muskets on a small scale can still be used. The role of the musketeers is mainly used to snipe the opponent's fierce generals and those wearing armor. As long as the fierce generals on the opposite side are killed, the others, the neat and uniform spear formations will definitely make them cry for their mothers. In this way, Marin issued an order to send 2,000 spearmen and 100 musketeers to Newcastle. Not to control Newcastle, but to control Newcastle's coal mines and docks to ensure the supply of coal. Chapter 349, English Mercenaries. Although an order was issued to send 2,000 troops, Marin understood that it was unlikely for 2,000 people to stop tens of thousands of hungry people without the protection of the castle. After all, the coal mines have sufficient food, which will inevitably attract the attention and covetousness of hungry people everywhere. So Marin prepared to recruit some locals as auxiliary soldiers to guard the coal mines and docks together. The coal mines in Newcastle are mainly concentrated near the Tyne River. What Marin needs to guard is mainly the coal mines near the Tyne River and the area from the coal transport docks on the Tyne River. If 2,000 spearmen are only guarding the coal mines, there will be no problem. However, guarding the distance from the coal mine to the dock is beyond his ability. Moreover, Marin not only needs to use food to hire local coal miners to help him dig coal, but also needs to protect the families of those coal miners. Because Marin gave those coal miners food, they would definitely bring it to their families to eat together. But the problem is that Newcastle at this time is full of people who are seriously short of food. Seeing that the women and children in the coal miners' families have food to eat, it is inevitable that young and strong men will have the idea of robbing. Therefore, Marin still needs manpower to help protect the families of those coal miners. Otherwise, who would want to dig coal for you if the safety of their families is not guaranteed? Even the families of those recruited auxiliary soldiers need to be protected together. For this reason, Marin plans to build a camp on the banks of the Tyne River in the form of a military camp to accommodate the families of coal miners and auxiliary soldiers. With all the dug pits outside the camp and all the wooden stakes on the fence of the camp, not to mention the hungry refugees, even the army cannot easily break through. As long as they give food and protect the safety of their families, Marin believes that there are many people willing to dig coal for themselves and protect the safety of coal mines and docks. Even Marin does not have to pay wages. As long as those people and their families can have food every day, they can hire enough people. After all, what Marin lacks the least is food. And the most lacking thing in the northern counties of England happens to be food. It is hard not to take advantage of the pile of things that you have the least need and use them to trade with the pile. Even Marin plans not to supply the English with pure rye bread, but to use the famous kolar bread, that is, black bread mixed with 15% straw chaff, to supply the English who serve him. Even so, this is much better than those black stick breads mixed with a lot of soil that can be used as bricks to hit people. As for adding wild vegetables, don't be funny, Newcastle is a disaster area with serious food shortages at this time. Wild vegetables are probably dug up by refugees. It's amazing to find wild vegetables. Refugees crossing the border are not much worse than locusts. Although Marin has not experienced famine, he has heard from the old people about the great famine of the last century in his previous life. In those days, let alone wild vegetables, tree bark and leaves were almost eaten, and grass roots were often used as rations. In fact, that was still good. The worst famine was the huge famine that swept across North China in the late Ming dynasty. That was a supernatural disaster that swept half of China and destroyed a powerful dynasty. At the end of the Ming dynasty, although the Ming dynasty was weak, the social order was still good. Moreover, the people lived a decent life. Although the Qing dynasty later tried to slander the Ming dynasty, according to the records of missionaries who came to China to preach in the late Ming dynasty, the people of the Ming dynasty lived a pretty good life at that time. At least, it was much better than the Europeans at that time. The Ming dynasty had abundant supplies, low prices, and a stable society, which made some missionaries not even want to leave. Of course, the places where those missionaries were involved belonged to the southeastern coastal areas of Fujian, Guangdong, Jiangsu, and Zhejiang, which were the richest places in the Ming dynasty. The northern region should not be so good. After all, the southeast region is a good place for 2 harvests a year. At the same time, most areas in the north only had 1 harvest a year, and the output was much lower than that in the south. The most critical thing is that the hardest hit areas are the 2 wests, Xishan and Xishan. The people in these 2 provinces are very tough. Let's not talk about Xishan. The territory of the old Qin people is full of brave people. It's common to be brave and fierce. If there is no way to make a living, it's not a big deal to raise the flag of rebellion. And Xishan province is not bad. There was a legend of Yubing Ranger in ancient times. This Bing refers to Bingzhou, which is Xishan province. Who is a ranger? That's the kind of person who draws his sword against each other at the slightest disagreement. Is it a big deal to rebel? Is it a big deal? It's normal for 2 provinces with such fierce folk customs to suffer from large-scale famine and large-scale bandits. It's the bad luck of the Ming dynasty. It didn't help the 2 wests well, and then let the people of Xishan force the emperor to death. Thinking of the bandits in Xishan, Ma Lin suddenly rang in his mind. His uncle and his second uncle are both his uncles, the high table and the low stool are all made of wood. The Xishan-style song with a strong Shangxi flavor came to. In fact, it was also the bad luck of the Ming dynasty, because the Jurchens in Liaodong rebelled, and the Ming dynasty spent too much military expenditure in Liaodong. When there was a large-scale famine in western Shangxi and western mountain provinces, not to mention the money and food for disaster relief, even the military pay could not be collected. Chongzhen humbly borrowed money from the ministers, but in the end he could not collect several million taels of military expenses. If the money for military expenses had been borrowed, perhaps the Ming dynasty could have lasted a few more years. The Song dynasty, which was also a dynasty with strong civil officials, had a developed economy, mainly developed commerce, which led to abundant national finances. What kind of famine is there? No problem, come, send a few officers to recruit soldiers, and recruit all the young and strong among the victims into the imperial army. How can the victims rebel without the young and strong? Rely on the elderly, women and children. Just go to bed. Therefore, because of the money, the Song dynasty was never caused any big problems by the victims. But in the end, they encountered the cheating Mongolia, and they were helpless. The Ming Empire, which was also ruled by civil officials, was very poor, mainly because it did not collect commercial taxes. In addition, the Liaodong region spent a lot of money against the Qing dynasty, which led to the country having no money. When it encountered famine, it was Guangzhou and Bingzhou, where brave people were everywhere. Then, it was not destroyed by the invincible 8 banners boasted by the Qing dynasty in later generations, but was destroyed by a group of fierce bandits from Xishan. The Song dynasty's method. Marin's eyes suddenly lit up. Marin didn't care about the life and death of England. In fact, Marin hoped that England would be as chaotic as possible. However, Marin was very concerned about the stability of the Newcastle area. Because it was related to whether he could get a stable supply of coal. Although there are coal mines in the Ruhr area and Cape Breton Island. However, the large-scale shipment of coal from the Ruhr area would attract the attention of other princes, and then explore their secrets. Cape Breton Island is too far away, and it takes 3 or 4 months for ships to go back and forth, which is really inconvenient to transport. Only the coal from Newcastle, England, across the North Sea, is most suitable for the salt boiling base and cement plant on Baltrum Island. Not only is the quantity large, but the confidentiality is good. After all, once the coal ship goes out to sea, who knows where it will be transported? Want to track? You have to ask the captain under Marin whether the telescope in his hand agrees or not. The only problem is the safety of the coal mine in Newcastle. Now, Marin has money and food. Obviously, using the method of the Song dynasty people to recruit the young and strong among the disaster victims as mercenaries is the best way. These young and strong English men, after being recruited as mercenaries, can not only be used to protect the safety of the Newcastle coal mine and the coal transport terminal. If there are more people, they can also be pulled to Germany to fight. Even if they are not as good as German mercenaries, they can be cannon fodder soldiers. At worst, training them as spearmen is no problem. Moreover, since Edward III promoted archery throughout England, it has become a fashion for the English to practice archery. In order to give citizens more time to practice archery, the English court even banned people from playing football for a long time, just to prevent people from losing their ambitions due to playing with things and delaying the practice of archery. Although there are not many people who meet the requirements of the longbow soldiers recruited by the king, there are many ordinary people in England who are good at archery. Therefore, Marin plans to recruit a group of young and strong people with good archery skills in England to form an archer unit. Its main function is to partially replace the role of musketeers on rainy days. After all, the matchlock gun cannot be used when it rains. At present, there are more than 300,000 refugees in several counties in northern England. Among them, it is not a big problem to select thousands of young and strong people suitable for fighting to become English mercenaries. As for the reduction of the destructive power of refugees to England after recruiting some mercenaries, it is not within Marin's consideration. Ever since hearing that Henry VII ordered the army to block the refugees in central England, Marin knew that there would be no big problems in England. If the refugees cannot reach the vicinity of London, they will not be able to cause much impact on England. Therefore, it is better to recruit some young and strong people from the refugees as mercenaries, so that they can serve as cannon fodder in the war. Chapter 350, The English Girl Wants It Too. It is very convenient to recruit Englishmen as mercenaries. Why? Because Frisian and English can communicate in this era. Because, in this era, the Frisian region is relatively closed and has not been greatly influenced by the Netherlands and Germany. Therefore, Frisian is still original. In later generations, Frisian was greatly influenced by the Dutch and German languages, and became less and less like English, and finally could not communicate with English. Even the Anglo-Saxons who crossed the sea to the British Isles lived on the North Sea, where the Frisians now live. And the Frisians are the part of the people who stayed behind when the Anglo-Saxons crossed the sea. Therefore, it is not surprising that the languages of both sides can communicate with each other. It just so happens that there are many Frisians in the Marin army. As long as a large number of Frisian veterans are sent to serve as grassroots officers in the English mercenaries, not only can they get started quickly and train the English mercenaries into shape, but it is also quite helpful to control the entire army. After all, the orders of the Frisian officers can be understood by the English. Moreover, when this English mercenary army is trained, if necessary, Marin can also lend this army to Earl Edward to use against Henry VII. Of course, that was when Earl Edward was at a disadvantage. If Earl Edward had the upper hand, Marin would not send troops to help. It must be said that Henry VII and his officials were still very capable. Faced with more than 300,000 refugees from the northern counties, Henry VII decisively ordered Richard Bull to take his 18,000 troops to block the refugees in several central counties to prevent refugees from going south. Although, after the influx of more than 300,000 refugees, several central counties will definitely be finished, but it is better than refugees pouring into London and the surrounding wealthy counties. Once London and the surrounding counties are harmed, England's national foundation will be shaken. Therefore, this move of strong man cutting off his arm by Henry VII and his ministers is very effective. But because of this, Marin's plan to use refugees to destroy London and the wealthy areas of southern England failed. In this way, the existence of this group of refugees is dispensable. Of course, if they stay, they can still have a huge impact on several counties in central England. Although it cannot shake the foundation of England, it can make the English busy for a long time. However, it does not take hundreds of thousands of refugees to wreak havoc on the 3 or 4 counties in the middle of England. Tens of thousands of refugees are enough to turn the counties in central England upside down. Thinking that he was recruiting immigrants in his territory, Marin suddenly had the idea of recruiting English people as serfs. Although it is said that from self-cultivating farmers to serfs, the social status has declined. However, in the case of dying, are these important? As long as Marin guarantees that there is enough bread, the hungry people will definitely be happy, even if they are made slaves. After all, in the face of life and death, what is that status and dignity? Being alive is more important than anything else. In this era, if you want to develop a place, a large population is essential. After all, cutting trees requires population, opening up wasteland requires a large population, and growing crops also requires a lot of population. In short, before the advent of the machine age, population is everything. Only with population can we do this and that. Without population, nothing can be discussed. At present, Marin not only has large tracts of land in his native land that need a large number of people to develop, but also large tracts of land in America that need to be developed. Therefore, Marin's demand for population is very large. Under normal circumstances, it is more troublesome for Marin to organize people to go to America. After all, who is willing to leave their homes and go to America to take risks? But under abnormal circumstances, it is very easy to do. For example, the current abnormal situation. The people in several counties in northern England can't even guarantee food and survival, so how can they be picky? At this time, Marin only needs to publicize that there is enough bread, and it is absolutely easy to take a large number of people from these refugees to the American colonies. Why did the British successfully establish large colonies on the coast of North America, 13 states in North America, in the original history? It's not that the British colonization method is better than the French, but because Britain has a large number of refugees who have lost their land and can immigrate to North America because of the enclosure movement. Therefore, although the means of colonization were more moderate and advanced, the French had to lose to the British on the issue of colonization in North America because of the social stability in France. It was a waste to let these 300,000 English refugees starve to death. If some people could be taken to the American colonies, it would be much better than watching them die. For example, there are only a few hundred colonists on the island of Grenada now, and the sugarcane plantations and arable land that can be planted are only 1 or 2,000 ugrams at most. If there are more, there will not be enough labor. Originally, Marin planned to buy some blacks or get some mousy slaves to enrich the population on the island of Grenada. However, seeing that there are so many British refugees with nowhere to settle, Marin suddenly came up with the idea of organizing a large number of immigrants from England to develop the island of Grenada. Don't want more, as long as you get 10,000 English refugees to Grenada, you can greatly accelerate the development of Grenada. Of course, Cuba needs more labor. After all, the area of Grenada is only 344 square kilometers. And the island of Cuba has an area of 100,000 square kilometers. By the way, the group of guys on Grenada are in a bad mood at this time. Why? For Mao May. But the Mao May imported from the Crimean Khanate before had been divided up by the soldiers and militiamen in the country. They have military merits, so they can't be given priority. By the way, Mao May. Marin suddenly slapped his head. Why did I forget the girls in England? Marin said regretfully. With several counties in northern England hit by disasters, all 300,000 refugees have nothing to eat. Whether they are old people, children, young people or women. Then the question is, if Marin does not intervene, those refugees will most likely starve to death. Moreover, the elderly, weak women and children will be the first to starve to death. Because they are weak and can't stand hunger. Moreover, they can't compete for food with those young men. Marin doesn't care whether the old, weak, sick and disabled people in England will starve to death. However, it would be such a pity if those English girls starved to death. There are more than 300,000 refugees, among which there are at least tens of thousands of girls. It would be such a pity if they starved to death. So, Marin instantly made a decision: send people to sneak into several counties in northern England, use food to lure those English girls who were about to starve to death, lure them over, bring them to East Frisia, and distribute them to the bachelors in the country as wives. They can even be sent to colonies such as Granada to be wives of the colonists. As for the opinions of young men in several counties in northern England, they are almost starving to death, and they still want wives. Those English girls would die if they stayed, so they might as well go far away and marry young men under Marin's rule. At least, they can have enough food and clothing and not starve to death.